Welcome to the Crush Your Sugar Craving Summit. I'm Michelle Jolly with Healthy Horizons Coaching. Today we'll be interviewing Janet Ottersberg. Janet has worked in health and wellness industry for more than 29 years. Her passion is in empowering her clients to create lasting change towards optimal health. Janet has a wide range of experiences and a depth of knowledge that gives her resources to assist her clients in creating lifestyle changes. Janet has worked as an occupational therapist for 29 years. She works with clients with metabolic disorders, including cancer, autism, ADHD, and autoimmune disease. She received her education as a life coach from Fielding Graduate University, along with specialty training in metabolic health coaching, and completed the Epidemic Answers Health Coach Training course. She is a certified Daring Way facilitator and is a program consultant and facilitator for a fresh chapter. Janet enjoys incorporating her experience as a certified yoga instructor also with all her clients. Her own struggle with weight and a family history of diabetes and cancer fueled her to dedicate her career and personal endeavors to creating lifestyle changes for optimal health. The drive towards a family-based model and initiating wellness plans with diet and lifestyle change is why her clients are able to realize their health and wellness goals. Let's welcome Janet. Hey, thanks for being here today. So good to have you.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you today. So we learned a little bit about history and what you're into right now, but just to give people a little more background, sounds like you have had a little bit of personal experience with the family health and understanding clients' needs. So how did kind of sugar fit into that, or as your family history, and why is it important, what you learned from others?
Yeah, so I have a very long history with sugar, unfortunately. So I've struggled with my weight for as long as I can remember. And I went on my first diet in second grade. Yeah, so it's been kind of my lifelong venture in dealing with sugar and weight. So that's how it really started for me. But I think that there was lots of factors that went into that. And I think those are important pieces in my sugar story. Is I grew up in a family with 10 kids. And I grew up during the 70s. And so this was a time when refined foods were just starting to be the hip thing to eat. And with 10 kids, my mom wasn't feeding us, the boxed foods. And we actually had a pretty good diet because we grew our own foods. We had a big garden and we would can and do all of that. But when you're feeding 10 kids on a limited budget, it's much cheaper if you put a lot of carbs in there. So we did a lot of casseroles, like tuna casserole and spaghetti and lots of breads and cereals and those sorts of things because it was cheaper to feed all those kids that way. So that was definitely a component in my sugar background. But the other thing was that we always had desserts. Mm-hmm. Every night we had a dessert as well. And so that definitely fed into that sugar addiction as well. And sugar was celebration. Every time it was a holiday, it was really based on sugary treats. And so I think that for me and for my family, sugar was equated to love. And I think that happens for a lot of families. And that not only happened within my own home, but being the 9th kid out of 10, I kind of was on my own a lot. My mom was really busy, and so I spent a lot of time by myself. And so I had this little routine of going to visit the neighbors. And so I would go to visit the elderly neighbors. I had 3 in particular, and I had a little route that I would go on every day. And I would stop at the first house and sit and visit. And Art would always have cookies and milk for me. And then I would go to the next place, and Mrs. Murphy always had a little treat. And then I would go to see Virgie, and she always had a wonderful little treat. So again, it was this equating sugar with love. So that was definitely a component for me. But then the other piece I think that was big for me in my sugar background is that because I was dealing with weight as a young kid, I got teased a lot. And so shame was a big piece of that puzzle as well. And then also because I was on that diet starting in second grade, my mom would be making food for me in particular to eat by myself while everyone else was eating all the good stuff. And so there was a certain amount of shame around that as well, because none of my other brothers and sisters had weight issues. So there was shame. And so I would eat the diet food. And then after dinner, I would run and sneak, the sugary treats. And then do things also to pull in that love because of the shame that I was feeling. So it was this vicious cycle going on. So I continued to diet throughout my life and have done every diet possible. And remember even doing, I was in the era of low fat diets where I even did a diet where it's like, don't eat any fat, but you can eat all the sugar that you want. And I remember eating handfuls of cinnamon bears on my diet because that's what was okay to do. And so, it was just something that I continued to struggle with. But one thing that was a big eye-opener for me was as these 10 kids in my family got into adulthood, then that's when all the effects of sugar showed up. And so the first big eye-opener was my oldest brother, who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. My father, who had a stroke and ended up dying in his later years because of, the effects of diabetes and stroke, and then have several other brothers and sisters that either have cancer or diabetes. And so it's really made an impact in my family. And so that's really driven me to look deeper and deeper into what are the root causes of, what's gone on in our family. And so I think why it's so important for me to then share this information is because ultimately prevention is the cure. And so if I could help one person to prevent some of the issues that I've had and some of the issues that my family members have had, I feel like my life has been worthwhile. The other thing that I think is really important in sharing is that family support is so very important. And I had support that my mom would cook meals for me that were what I was supposed to be eating. But can you imagine if my entire family changed to eating in that way? And, how successful it would have been for me. And then my entire family, like how it would have changed my entire family and then their kids. So I think the impact would have been huge. And I think that that's so important in helping kids to change those addictions is to have everyone on board. And then I think the final big thing for me and the importance of this is that as an occupational therapist, I can treat and treat and treat and treat and treat and never see any change if the root cause has not been taken care of.
Yeah, very true. Lots of good insights for people. Yeah, especially getting the whole family to change. And that also would take away the shame part of it too. And so lots for people to think about. In your bio, you mentioned that you work with people struggling with metabolic health disorders. So I know other experts have mentioned that in the summit. But can you kind of get into explain what that really means? What is that?
Yeah, it's complicated. So I'm going to give a simple answer to what metabolic disorders are. So a metabolic disorder is a dysfunction in the body's ability to process food to fuel. And so for many reasons, our body has lost the ability to convert fat to fuel and has now changed to converting glucose to fuel. So glucose is sugar and glucose is carbs. And it's an inefficient process. And in that process of converting glucose into fuel, the end product is inflammation in the body.
Yeah. Okay. So people know that sugar isn't good for them. Most people do. But some people aren't, like, to the point of where they have a chronic illness, where they're noticing what it's doing to their body, joint pain and stuff like that, or they haven't had a relative like you, family member, that's had any issues. What are some other symptoms that might show up with too much sugar and carbs in someone's diet?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most obvious ones is hyperactivity. You know, and you'll see if you have kids and they have come home from a birthday party, it's a different kid than when you drop them off at the birthday party. So there's those highs that sugar creates, which is the, you know, hyperactivity. But then there's also the crash afterwards, and so sluggishness is another way of detecting if there's, you know, sugar issues. Gastrointestinal problems. Let's see, there's infections, chronic infections. That's a big one. And in kids, a lot of times it shows up as ear infections.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard a little bit of association with dairy and ear infections, but yeah, it's about the sugar to know that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you work with clients. We mentioned in the bio about kids with ADHD, and we just kind of touched on that, the hyperactivity. So many kids are diagnosed these days, and I think sometimes a little too much, or it could be the sugar. But how do you feel the sugar works into that? And, like, can you get into a little more on how the connection?
Yeah, absolutely. So with any metabolic disorder, so, you know, I mentioned the process of what a metabolic disorder but some of those metabolic disorders are ADHD, autism, autoimmune disorders, cancer. And with those metabolic disorders, as I said, the end product is inflammation. And so sugar adds to that inflammation because you have too much glucose in the body, which then adds to that breakdown in the process, in that metabolic process at the cellular level. So it can show up as hyperactivity, show up as inattention. How sugar interferes and create problems in ADHD. But also leaky gut is another issue. And a lot of times what's seen in kids with autism, kids with ADHD, what's called dysbiosis. And dysbiosis is that the body has increased levels of bad bacteria and decreased levels of good bacteria. And in that process, then there's a yeast overgrowth. And when there's yeast overgrowth, that can be one of the factors that leads to leaky gut syndrome. When you have leaky gut syndrome, then there's small particles of food and toxins that can leak out into the blood system, and then that can affect the blood-brain barrier. And then when that happens, then we have inflammation in the brain. And so again, sometimes it can come across as hyperactivity. And then there's definitely a component to allergies and ADHD, which again goes back to that leaky gut syndrome.
Yeah. Interesting how everything's so connected.
Yes.
Yeah. So nowadays, so many kids are just they'll go get the diagnosis and then they just give them a drug and say, here, take this and change your behavior. What do you think about that? Or does that work?
I think it can work momentarily, but I think with anything, with any kind of a reductionist model, it can work for a little while, but it's not going to work in the long run. And I don't want to downplay the use of medications, because sometimes that's an important piece, but I think it needs to be a piece of the puzzle. I think all these other things have to come into play. And again, I mentioned occupational therapy treatments. They're going to be enhanced if you treat the root cause. Same thing with any of the ADHD medications. Their benefits are going to be enhanced if you can treat the root cause. So are there allergies that are causing problems for this kid? Is there a metabolic disorder that's causing problems for this kid? Is there heavy metal toxicity that's causing problems for this kid? And so you can keep giving medication and keep giving medication, but if you're not taking care of those other things, eventually the medication isn't going to work. They're going to have to try another one. They're going to have to give more doses of it, or higher doses. And so again, like with everything, you've got to look at it as a full spectrum approach, not just one thing. One thing isn't going to change it.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. The thing for people to think about, which route they want to go.
Yeah.
So we're kind of talking about kids with ADHD. You don't really hear about adults and ADHD diagnosis as much, or I don't. It's not like they just kind of all of a sudden lose it, right? How does that work?
Well, I think that we as humans have a wonderful ability to adapt to what's going on in our life. And I think that there's a lot of ways that lifestyle changes help people to adapt to those ADHD symptoms. So people do exercise, and people do meditation, and people do a lot of different things that help their system so that they can be more attentive, more calm. And so then I don't think it looks as much like ADHD as an adult, because we've learned to accommodate for that.
Yeah, I suppose a little of it is you see the really driven entrepreneur that's working all the time and has all this hyper energy, but you think it's a good thing because they're being productive and channeling it a different way.
Yeah, and then there's other ways that there's inappropriate ways that people deal with those symptoms as well, and it could be drugs and drinking and smoking and things that help them to calm down, but they not necessarily good for the rest of their health.
So been talking about sugar a lot. How do you fit it in are you more in the abstinence or moderation camp? And what does your typical food plan look like for a day?
Yeah, so for me personally, I believe in abstinence of refined sugar. And with my long history of insulin resistance, I have to not have sugar in my diet. So moderation doesn't work for me personally. But that being said, I do use sugar substitutes. So I will do a dessert made with stevia, or I'll do a dessert made with monk fruit. So some of those replacements that don't raise your glucose index, but it's still a treat. It's not something that I do every day. Or I'll have like 3 or 4 raspberries as a treat. Yeah. So, again, it's the refined sugars are a definite no for me. Yeah. Moderation with some of those other things that are in the level of not raising glucose glucose index. And I really follow a ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
and really try and increase the amount of fat and really cut out carbs. So for me, it's not just refined sugar, but also carbohydrates, because those also raise the glucose levels.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned the alternative sweeteners, a couple of the good ones.
Mm-hmm.
Does that kind of react the same in the body, or it doesn't raise the insulin as much, but does your body still think it's getting the sugar, and does it kind of still want sugar?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And for everybody, it's different. And you really have to do individual testing on that to see if it's going to, what we say in the ketogenic diet, is it going to kick you out of ketosis?
Ah.
So you can test your blood ketone levels
Mhm.
after you've tried one of those. Like if I'm going to have something with monk fruit, in order for me to know if it's going to affect me, then I'll test my blood ketone levels. And if they've gone up, and if my glucose levels have gone up, then I know that, yeah, my body can't handle that sort of sweetener. And so you really have to do individual testing to figure it out.
Good to know.
Yeah.
If somebody's wanting to change their food plan and remove sugar, do you think, like some people have said, do a detox or a cleanse? Is that good? Or is it better to kind of slowly remove it? Because I know with some people that are really toxic and full of the bacteria, that it could die off and then create more issues. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm coming from the perspective of lasting change.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like getting rid of sugar needs to be a lasting change in your life. And in order to make change, it has to be something that you do consistently. And it takes time. And so I'm in the camp of you need to go about it slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there may be some people that can just quit cold turkey and say, hey, I'm going to do this cleanse and be done with it and never eat sugar again. But for most people, things have to happen slowly, gradually, and they have to incorporate that change into their body and into their routine. And so I like to ask people to do slow changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good way to do it. Yeah. Often we make changes like our immediate food plan, and then when we go into like in the world, kind of talking about it can be in your family, but then there's a celebration, or like you were talking about, the food is sugar shows up there a lot, or family gathering, or kids going to a birthday party. How do you handle that, or how do you suggest that with your clients when it's hard to even sometimes it's hard to even find a vegetable at some of those things?
Yeah, I think it's really about preparation and communication. You know, I think it's very important for you as the parents to be the advocate for your child, and what they eat is part of their health plan. And so not worrying about stepping on people's toes, you know, and letting people know, yeah, I'm going to let my child come over for the birthday party, but I'm asking you to not give them all of these treats, or maybe a small amount of that treat. I think the other thing is taking food that they can eat and making sure that there's enough to share with everybody, so that they're not singled out, you know, so that they have an option. There's enough to share with everybody, and the other adults there understand why you're doing that. And I think that if other people understand why you're doing that, then they'll jump on board and want to help you in that process.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good idea. People to do that. So what we've kind of had a lot of things we've talked about. If you were gonna just quickly tell somebody what's one thing maybe they could start with today to get on their journey of reducing or removing sugar from their diet, what might the one first step be?
First step is to get rid of sugary drinks.
Mm-hmm.
Get rid of sodas, get rid of juice. You know, most juice has more sugar than a Coke. get rid of the juice, get rid of sugary drinks. And that sugary drinks for adults includes going to get your favorite fancy coffee drink, because those are more sugar than anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty fortunate. I don't like coffee, so.
Oh, yeah, you're lucky.
Yeah. All right. We're kind of coming to the end. Is there anything that I haven't asked or that you think that people really should know that we talked about yet?
Yeah, I'd like to touch a little bit on the autism.
Oh,
side.
yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So people often are questioning about autism and how sugar plays into the role of autism. And I think, again, with autism, it's a puzzle. And in the conventional medicine world, autism is, it's considered a developmental disorder, and it's based on behavioral criteria. And they don't really look beyond that. And so there's not really a cure, and there's not really an understanding as to why kids get autism. You know, and we're at a point now where the CDC says that 1 in 54 kids will have autism. Wow. That is a 600% increase from 2 decades ago. So for me, working in that world with kids with autism and ADHD, that is a huge red flag. And I really needed to know more about that. Like, that doesn't make sense to me that all of a sudden, you know, we have the 600% increase. And so that really prompted me to dive into looking at autism in a different way. And so in that research and that part of my education is looking at autism from a functional medicine perspective. And from that perspective, they look at autism from the total load theory, which really means that autism doesn't come from one thing, but it comes from this cumulative effect of all these different stressors that we have today, you know, and that kids have today, and even have, you know, are already experiencing while they're in the womb. And so there's biological stressors, and those can be sleep, that can be diet, so the standard American diet. There's environmental stressors, which is EMFs and toxins, heavy metal toxicity. There's emotional stressors. So if a child has had trauma in their life, or they have lots of worries and fears. There's physical stressors, which can be things like unintegrated reflexes or lack of movement. And then there's educational stressors, which can be an inappropriate curriculum, or the other thing is bullying or not feeling safe at school. And so it's not one thing, it's all of these things that then can create a tipping point towards, you know, a child moving into this spectrum of autism. And the thing that's important to me in regard to sugar in this is that it is one piece of the process. It is refined sugar and standard American diet. And so maybe it's that one thing that caused the tipping point, you know, was the sugar. But because all of these things are related to things that we can change, to me, that is the most hopeful news ever, because these are all things that we can create change around, and that can make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, great note to end on. There's hope.
There is hope.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, you have a really nice free gift for everybody. It's Breaking the Sugar Habit ebook. People can click the link below and grab that from you. Where else can they find you?
They can find me at ottersbergcoaching.com.
Okay. All right. That sounds great. Well, I guess, yeah. close up for today and say goodbye to everyone, and thank you all for being here. We'll see you tomorrow on another wonderful interview on more sugar.
Great. Thank you, Michelle.
Bye.